Hello my friends, welcome to my channel, Lindy's Magpie Reads. If you're new here, I'm Lindy. I read a lot, pretty much a book a day, love to talk about books, and that's what I'm going to do today, as well as tell you about a few other things going on. Like yesterday I had a pre-cancer skin treatment, and I'm keeping my head turned so you don't see the scab that's forming on the side of my nose. I have had basal cell cancer taken off my nose in the past, a whole bunch of stitches. It was Mohs surgery that took 7 hours or more, and fingers crossed that this one won't be as deep. I'll do a biopsy and make sure that all of it's gone. Hopefully there will be nothing further required. I'm filming inside today, not because of the sun, but because of the wind. And my phone really picks up the sound of the wind, so not out in the garden today. I'm in my sweetie's art studio. We have an open house and art show happening tomorrow evening, Friday, and that's why I'm filming this on a Thursday. My Friday Reads it won't be finished editing till tomorrow, so I'll post it up close to the usual time. I'm still baking cakes. Got together with a few friends and I baked a sunken plum and apricot cake from this book, You Are Human and You Need Cake, by Julie Van Rosendahl. This is what it looks like in the book, where she did it with apples. Love this good book. If you haven't heard already, my sweetie and I are in the midst of packing and moving. We're not going anywhere until sometime in October, but there's lots to get ready before we move to another province. And I went through some papers that I had saved from my job at the public library, including this adorable sign that some kid made for me, "Never Stop Reading." At the public library, instead of having all of our read-alike lists online, which is what happens now, in 2008 we were still using paper book lists, and I made this one, If You Love Twilight by Stephanie Meyer, and then there's a list of titles you might like inside. Somebody added their own note to this. Can you read that? Then you should be sterilized. Which made me laugh. I guess I can throw it away now. I started working at the public library in 1989. I was out right from the start, and I was doing queer activism right from the start. And as a result of one of the projects that I did, I got a Pride Award from the gay and lesbian community of Edmonton for outstanding service to the lesbian, gay, and bisexual community of Edmonton. That was in 1997, and it was for putting rainbow spine labels on books with gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender content. At that time, there was no way to search for queer books in the public library catalog. There was no subject cataloging of fiction, and so to help people find books that they wanted to read, this was my project. It was so successful at the branch that I worked at that other library branches were getting requests from their patrons saying, "Where are the rainbow spine labels on your books?" And it was going to be expanded to more branches, but at an all managers meeting, one manager put the kibosh on everything, a homophobic reason. And in the end, something really great happened out of that. And that was that the Edmonton Public Library decided to start adding subject cataloging for all of their fiction. So as long as the Library of Congress had attached lesbian dash fiction or something like that to the book, you could look it up in the library catalog. And in the meantime, I also had a thorough book list, rainbow reading. Another project that I worked on more recently was this resource list for the Edmonton Public School Board. And there's the title, Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, Recommended Fiction and Nonfiction Resources. The list used to be available digitally online. I'll check. If it is, I will include a link down below. I think we compiled this first one in 2011. I did it with an Edmonton Public Library colleague, Kim, and Christopher Wells. There was an updated edition a few years later. Oh, and here's Kim that I was just mentioning. We had a table during a Pride festivities in 2011 to promote the Edmonton Public Library and answer questions about the library. And I've got one other thing to show you that I saved. This drawing that a girl made for me. It says, the Qalupalik, and it's written in yellow pencil crayon on gray, so it's really hard to read, but I think it says, my mom told me this story years ago, and it's signed Angel. When this drawing was made, I was doing a summer reading program, and I was given the outline of it, that it was for, I think, children age 5 to 10, something like that, story time plus craft. The suggested craft that they gave for the staff to do, something simple like gluing cotton balls into the shape of an igloo, which there was no way that I was going to have kids do that. So one of the stories that I chose was this Inuit traditional story, the Qalupalik. I chose the edition by Elisha Kilabuk, illustrated by Joy Ang. And there were some adults in the program. There were also a family of children that I thought were Asian. And it wasn't until I got this drawing that I realized it was an Inuit family. Either later that day or the next day, my manager called me into the office because there had been a complaint. One of the other parents, so not this family, there was no adult in with them, had complained that this folktale that I read was too scary for children. And my manager told me that she trusted me, that I had a good idea about age groups and stories that I read, but she just wanted me to be aware. And I showed her not only the book, which is most definitely for young children. It is in the E section, which is for early readers, not even upper elementary. And I also showed her this drawing that Angel made for me, thanking me for reading the story of the Qalupalik. And for the craft portion, I had a bunch of Inuit art books. The kids looked at them and then they had paper and drawing tools and made their own art. So since I was going through this pile of stuff, I decided to reread Qalupalik. It's delightful. The Qalupalik are monsters that steal children, but they're not very smart. And this is the story about how an orphan child outwitted a Qalupalik. Elisha Kilabuk, by the way, is known for his performances and storytelling, and he dedicates this book to all those who are named after his mother, Makpalu, for his work would not be possible without her storytelling. Next up, I want to tell you about an audiobook that also has monsters in it, The Night Ship by Jess Kidd. This is a book for adults, and it's told in two separate storylines. One is 1628, 1629, and the other is 1989. And it is based on a real event, the shipwreck of a Dutch ship called the Batavia. In both storylines, the central character is a 9-year-old child. Maiken, the girl in the 17th century, is this wonderful, curious, precocious girl who goes everywhere on the ship and suspects that there might be a monster lurking in the hold. In the 1989 version, it's a boy, Gil, who is different from other kids. His mother moved around a lot, so Gil didn't go to school. But Gil has learned enough. He can read a road map, do a decent French manicure, put a grown woman in the recovery position, and shoplift a square meal. Mum called these life skills. Life skills were better than school skills. Mum would tell well-meaning sticky beaks that Gil was homeschooled. So the 1989 portion with Gil in it is set on an island off the western coast of Australia. And you might have heard of bunyips, a monster from Indigenous Australian mythology. So that's what they're talking about here. How do you describe dread, Gil? That's what the bunyip is, an attempt to give fear a shape. Gil thinks on this. Everyone's fear looks different, Birgit continues. So everyone's creature looks different. But they all eat crayfish, women, and children. That seems to be universal. Gil. They're just warnings for kids, not to play near water or talk to strangers. I listened to The Night Ship in audio, and it's two different narrators that do the two timelines. It's really engaging in the audio edition. Next up is another audiobook, The Heat Will Kill You First. Life and Death on a Scorched Planet, and it's by Jeff Goodell. The audiobook is read by L.J. Ganser. So, science made fascinating. Like there's a chapter on air conditioning, for example, and how it went from an American curiosity to a global obsession. Here's a bit from the book. Comfort is valued because it promises consistency, normalcy, and predictability, which allow for increased productivity or a good night's sleep. Comfort indicates that one has risen above the inconsistencies of the natural world and triumphed, not only over nature and the weather, but over chance itself. We can rely on comfort. It will be there when we get back. It's a false victory, however. The quest for comfort at all costs, or to be more precise, the sense that comfort is an inalienable right of modern life, is wreaking havoc on our world. Comfort is destroying the future. So specifically about air conditioning, switching to non-fossil fuel energy can help, and increasing the efficiency of air conditioners, and thinking differently about how we build things, because traditionally, especially in hot countries, architecture incorporated aspects that would help keep people cool. Thick walls, ventilation, shade, light colors, that sort of thing. The author goes on to say, the biggest legacy of air conditioning may be the gap between the cool and the damned. This is not a technological failure as much as it is a cultural and psychological issue. In the second half of the 20th century, prosperous Americans got hooked on comfort with little thought as to the cost of that comfort to the welfare of others, including other species and the world around them. That addiction has now spread to millions of people around the world who find that they too cannot live without cheap, cold air. There is a chapter on the history of scientific knowledge about the connection between burning fossil fuels and the warming of the earth that dovetails nicely with a book I talked about recently, Fire Weather by John Vaillant, which is excellent. Read Fire Weather. He talks about a melting of the polar ice caps, both in Antarctica and in the North Pole, and how that's affecting creatures like polar bears, which is also talked about in a book I read and talked about recently, 8 Bears by Gloria Dickey. There's a whole section on sweat and how animals cool off. Of course, the number one thing for everybody, humans and other animals alike, is to seek shade and to have access to water. And if you want to know more about sweat, I recommend The Joy of Sweat, The Strange Science of Perspiration by Sarah Everett. There was a recent edition on the podcast 99% Invisible called Shade Redux, talking about the importance of shade and how it's unfairly distributed in cities like Los Angeles. So I will link below if you want to know more about that shade episode. It was excellent, really, really good. There's a guy, Sam Block, I think his name is, who's currently writing a book about shade. Well, there's talk about heat waves in this book and how they're killing people, and yet there's a difficulty in communicating the danger, especially because places that are getting really hot, like Buffalo, for example, people aren't used to the heat and they don't realize the kind of safety measures that they need to take and to check in on family and friends who may need help. He talks about the heat wave in Europe in 2003 where 30,000 people died. Half of those were in France. And in Paris, the style of the buildings with uninsulated roof areas and the roof made of zinc made it really hot. And yet to change that design, which is possible, is a cultural question. There's a lot of people that say, don't touch my historic buildings. So what's to be done? And much more recently, in 2021, there was a heat dome over the Pacific Northwest. This book just made me so much more aware of that aspect of climate change. They talk about migrant workers who tend to be working outside, either in fields or on construction projects, and how many of them are dying of heat. Delivery drivers also in un-air-conditioned vehicles. And this reminded me of a really good book that I recommend. I think I've mentioned it lots of times on my channel, Border and Rule: Global Migration, Capitalism, and the Rise of Racist Nationalism, and it's by Harsha Walia. Jeff Goodell also quotes Sonia Shaw and her book, The Great Migration: Beauty and Terror of Life on the Move. Now this book was already on my radar because Doris and Heidi in their Book Naturalist book club chose Sonia Shaw as an author spotlight in May, and this is the one of Shaw's books that I really want to read. If you're curious about, want to know more about the Book Naturalist book club, look for links down below. My main problem with this book is the human interest element of it. It seemed a bit overdone to me. It's not a part that I really look for in nonfiction. And interestingly, Doris of Aldi Books talked about that recently as well. I will link her video down below. She was talking about how when she read a whole bunch of nonfiction for the BookTube Prize, this was an aspect of nonfiction that she noticed that she didn't care for. Me either. How do you feel when an author does this and describes everything about a person or a family that died of heat? In this case, the heat will kill you first, so that it's more real to you. To me, it's like how on news programs they do a dramatized version of some kind of crime or event. A little bit of information is okay, but I just don't want a whole bunch of blow by blow and what they were wearing and all that kind of stuff. Other than that, I quite like this. 4 stars. Next up is another science book. This one is in picture book format. We Are Branches. It's all in poetry. It is by Joyce Sidman with illustrations by Beth Krommes. Beth has done scratchboard illustrations and then colored them in with watercolor. It is really unusual in that it's in the voice of a shape in nature, the branching pattern. There's information at the back about fractals and this, how this branching pattern is inside your body, in snowflakes, in feathers, in leaves, trees. The wings of insects. You can't go wrong with Joyce Sidman. I'm excited every time I see a new book by her, and this one just came into the library. I see that the light keeps changing in here. Clouds are coming and going, and it's really windy out there, so I hope it's not too annoying for you watching this video. I was talking about insects and the branching patterns, the veins on their wings. Next up, this one I just picked up at the library. I haven't read it yet. Buzz, Sting, Bite by a Norwegian scientist, Anne Sverdrup Thygesen, and it's translated by Lucy Moffat. This is the August book for the Book Naturalist book club that I mentioned earlier. It's also called Extraordinary Insects in another edition, and of course the original Norwegian is another title as well. If you're doing Women in Translation Month, I hear this is really good. I'll tell you more about it when I've read it. But it's not going to work for the Women's World Cup readathon because I'm not on Team Norway. I started out on Team Italy, and then when Italy lost to Sweden, I thought that I had moved to Team Sweden. But Elizabeth of Bouquins and Books, who also started out Team Italy, told me I was mistaken. because Italy didn't get knocked out until they lost to South Africa. So, little did I know, I was on Team South Africa. Got to read something by a South African writer. And I did. I will tell you about that book in just a minute. But shortly after that, South Africa lost to the Netherlands. So, on I go. Team Netherlands. I hope that's right, Elizabeth. There's a Discord chat group for the Women's World Cup Readathon, but I haven't logged on to that. Discord and me don't get along that well. I'm just muddling along. Later today, the Netherlands plays Spain, and depending on the outcome of that game, I might be reading something by a Spanish author next. If you have a recommendation for something very short by a Spanish author, preferably by a woman, please leave me a comment down below. But in the meantime, I was looking for something by a Dutch writer, and I ended up finding a bunch of poetry by 7 different Dutch poets. Some of them were women. My favorite poems were by M Vasalis, who I learned was one of the best known poets in the Netherlands. And so I will read you a short little poem, and I will link to more of the poems down below. It's translated from the Dutch by David McKay. Lullaby. Each day I claw my way up over stone. The blue of evening comes, but not the end. And now, approaching the volcano's edge, the plants, the birds, the song all left behind, I'm out of grace again alone, and sore afraid of dreams that cannot be undone. So, I mentioned that I read something by a South African author, and that was In a Strange Room by Damon Galgut. My friend Kathy gave me this book years ago. It was published in 2010, and I think I got this from her in 2011, and it's signed by the author. And it's 3 interconnected novellas, or really long short stories, because the book itself is pretty short. It's only 180 pages long in total. In a nutshell, I loved it. It's told in the voice of someone named Damon, looking back on his younger years, 3 separate journeys that he made. And because I have also traveled a lot, I found that I could really relate to that aspect, that desire to move and go and be in new places. And the other thing that Galgut does so well is describe the interactions between people, often strangers, sometimes friends. In the 3rd story, he's traveling with a friend that he's known for a really long time. She has a mental health crisis while they're in India. Things are tough. These are definitely character-based stories with vivid setting descriptions, and I'm not surprised that it was shortlisted for a Booker Prize. And that leads me to tell you about this whole internet rabbit hole that I went down, looking at all of the Booker winners and shortlisted titles right from the beginning. Now, Scott of Gunpowder Fiction and Plot recently did a video of his 12 top all-star Booker books. I will link to that video below. And I've been thinking that I want to do that too. So when I was looking through this list, I found 77, well actually now 78 titles that I think I gave 5 stars to. I found other ones that I had read. I found a few that I really hated or didn't finish, but mostly there was a whole bunch of great books there that I like to be reminded of. I'm still hoping to do that kind of, my top dozen Booker winners or shortlisted books. To come, more to come. In the meantime, check out Scott's video, and if you are keen to follow booktubers that are also keen about the Booker Prize, I recommend Bob the Bookerer and Aaron of Run Right Reads. Aaron recently did a prediction of who's going to win this year's Booker. That was really well done. Go and watch that. I will link it below. And now I'm on to the last book that I've read in the past week. Best book. It's a Canadian classic, The Tin Flute by Gabrielle Roy. It is translated from French by Alan Brown. And I buddy read this with Marilyn Maya Mendoza. I will link her channel down below. We started this on about the 2nd of July and just finished it this week. We went chapter by chapter, deep dive into the writing. It's a debut. The writing is gorgeous. It was first published in 1945, I think. Yeah, first published in 1945. The French title, Bonheur d'occasion, something like secondhand happiness or a fleeting happiness. And this is the story of working class people and the Second World War. It's set in 1940 over a period of about 2 months, 2 or 3 months, and it focuses on one family, husband and wife, and their many children. And there's a lot of foreshadowing, so you know more or less what to expect, and yet she manages to keep you wanting to turn the pages and find out what's happening next. Chapters tend to jump from focusing on one person to focusing on another, and then back to what happened next from the bit of a cliffhanger that you are left with. The structure is just absolutely brilliant. The Saint-Henri area of Montreal, where these characters live and work, is outstanding. The questions about war and why soldiers sign up and why we go to war at all really are permeating the story. When I was in high school, we studied one of her other novels. It was La Petite Poule d'Eau, Where Lives the Water Hen. And I don't know why it's taken me so long to get to the Tin Flute, but wow, I'm glad I finally did. That's great. So, those are all the books, all the things that I got to tell you about today. Thank you very much for watching, all you beautiful people. Please leave me some comments down below. I'd love to interact with you and really, really appreciate your comments. So I'll say goodbye for now, and I will see you all soon. Bye.